Another state. I'm trying to eat down a whole nother plate. Seem like my homies was stuck in the hood. I just told them be safe in the state.
Like almost half the year. So that should matter for something. Today is our Black Myths in Review, as in reviewing the myths we went over throughout the year. And then the second episode this month will just be a rerun of something we've done in the past. I'm thinking about maybe the one we did on DNA tests, ancestry tests. The second one we did with hood biologists. But anyway, how y'all doing? You know, again, it's been a while since we all been on the screen together. You know,
I've been chilling, my brother. It's been chilling. It's been a long year. I think it's been a long year for a lot of us. It's a lot of shit that's been going on. A lot of shit. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah.
I don't say it at the same time, but this year been long. It has been long as fuck. I'm very ready for it to be over.
More than ready.
There were highs.
Yeah.
There was lows. I'm currently sick, so but we're here. We've made it.
Mm-hmm.
We're being alive and Black, so
we survived.
It's definitely been one for the books, but we're here.
Yeah, normally I don't say that. I'll let y'all usually say it's been a long year, but this one I'd actually agree. But like it was a long one, and it was a lot of twists and turns, even to keep the show going, because there was a lot of scheduling conflicts and just,
but we stuck out. We made it happen.
Yeah, just keeping it posted.
Yeah, we stayed 10 toes down.
It's so crazy though, because even when we were all discussing the list and talking through it, and going through just conversations about like which ones meant the most stress and things like that, I completely forgot that one of my favorite of the year was this year. I literally thought we did it last year, which was when we did our live show in DePaul. We were all having a conversation. I was like, that was this year? That's crazy. So
yeah.
It shows how long of a year it's been. Because even me, myself, I had to pause for a second. I was like, that did happen this year.
Yeah.
Chicago really did happen this year. Hey, we lived it up in Chicago, though. Shout out to DePaul University.
Especially y'all.
First time got to see Cameron in person.
That. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the emphasis on the word long, because it does just feel like a lot happened, and that's just us thinking about the podcast and our own lives. There's been a lot that's just happened in the year, separate of our personal lives. This fall, part of this last fall part of the year with Palestine, Israel nonsense, and the way that seemed to have shifted discourse, and it has caused even more repression than was already occurring. People not being allowed to even voice their opinions and being called terrorists. Again, it was ongoing before that. I mean, we talked about Cop City this year. It's been going on, but it was just that seemed to have a more, long-lasting effect. And then just watching that online and just seeing what's happening, it's been tough on everybody to just see it, and then to be in a world. I mean, we'll get to this later because we did an episode on it, but to just be in a world where that's happening, and people are really like going out of their way to tell you that that's not happening. Like schools are being bombed and all this shit, and it's just like, well, shrugs. As far as what to expect for the next year, we hope to be a little bit more organized on things, give you a little bit more content on social media, revisit some of our old myths, take a little bit more inquiries from other people who have asked us about myths. I know I'm usually really bad. I always say that when people email us about responding. Sometimes when y'all hit us up, I don't really know what to say. It sounds like, sometimes people just want to share their thoughts on their mind, and that's fine. I just don't know what to say back. Like, but but nah, if people want to send in their myths, we'll try to at least respond. We're not about to be a show that's dictated by that. That's just not how we want to do it. But there are things that we don't spot that other people spot, so we do appreciate when folks hit us up. And we have taken up other people's myths before, like other people's suggestions, I should say. But this year, I think we could have done a little bit more of that. More so,
Y'all submit y'all when y'all be in the DMs. Just be cognizant. Like, is this just something you want to have a conversation on, or is this something that is actually impacting the whole of Black folks? Is this something that is misconstrued and that actually needs to be debunked for the betterment of folks? Like, what information is already out there? Like, we don't want to just sit here and talk about things that everybody already knows is bullshit.
Yeah.
That's not the point of this. We will not be talking about things happening in pop culture. That's not what we're here for. But I do think that as the world continues to shift and as things continue to happen, that we as a team can adjust and accommodate. And like I already said, like there are things that folks have sent us and we were like, damn, like that actually didn't even cross our mind. And it sent us into a whole nerdy ass spiral to go learn about it. Like I will never ever forget us discussing like safaris. That
that definitely was something somebody else brought up to us. Yeah.
Pop culture. If you ever see us come up with Black myths, entertainment news, then you know we've been infiltrated. Like you already know something's wrong. If anybody wants to send us episode ideas, please refer to our clarifying method episode. Please.
Yeah, it's an old one, but we should probably do that again, honestly, just the update for people who may not be able to scroll that far back.
The year was long. There was some really good things that came out of this, both for us as people, but especially for us as a collective. I think some of our episodes were just, and the work that we got to do collectively and stuff that y'all got to do individually was just really amazing this year.
Yeah, just to go over a few accomplishments before we review all the different episodes. Again, I'm not good at accomplishment lists, so if I forgot something, please remind me. Something that came across actually, I think a few weeks ago, our podcast got picked up, or not picked up, but it was sampled for a podcast out in the UK called Have You Heard of George's Podcast? It's a BBC podcast by a brother who named George the Poet, who does his whole pod in poetry, like he'll do a history lesson, but he'll do it through poetry. It's like, so he used our Lumumba episode and a clip from that. The audacity of Lumumba and the Congolese people is that they thought they could set the terms of how the resources should be shared. What were they thinking?
Oh, please believe the CIA was lurking, paying off politicians.
So it's good to show we have that kind of reach, that we're not just within the States, but even out in the UK. I know last year we had something like translated into French or some shit like that. So it's good to know, we have listeners like outside of just the United States. And shout out to George, because he reached out, because I wouldn't have ever known, but he reached out, actually posted a video about it. I'll probably put a clip in the edit for people to see. And he used our episode about Lumumba, which we'll get to. There was the Pendleton 2 documentary. That's the thing that I'm probably most proud of. Our original interview with one of the Pendleton 2, really both of them, actually was used in the documentary that I was able to be a co-director of. And that film has helped really lead, that film has really helped bring awareness to that case and hopefully their eventual release. And as a representative on the Defense Committee, I can say that, the investigation we did on this podcast, has really helped get that out, get the word out there. And I think we'll by next year, I hope by the end of next year, one of our accomplishments will be saying that they got out of prison. Like that's legitimately what I hope to be the thing. We did our first in-person live recording at DePaul University on the myth of the circulating black dollar. I'm the only one that remembers the myth. But we did an episode on that.
I'm out. I
There
remember.
There was some check the group text. There was some they were like, what was that? Was that the one on dinosaurs? Or nah, it was about the means of production. But but yeah, so we did that. It was cool to be live in person. It was good to see that we still had the same chemistry in person because some people I've met in person that I met online, we don't really vibe like that in person. So it was good to see that we still had that chemistry. And it was just good to be brought out to speak in person at a university to teach people, since our stuff's been used for classrooms and stuff, it was nice to actually be hosted and paid for that work for once. And then this could be, I guess, a personal accomplishment, but I still credit this to the podcast because I don't think I would have ever gotten to the level to write a book without the podcast. So we got me and Rasul, who's been on here, Rasul Mawad. He's co-authored a book on laundering Black rage. We talked about laundering Black rage last year. That was this long essay that I wrote. Not I'm going to get into the details of it because we'll be here all day. But I'm gonna share the screenshot of that real quick. For those of you who are listening, sorry, you'll have to go to YouTube and watch this one. Can't really make it visually work for you. So yeah, so we have the book cover here, Laundering Black Rage, The Washing of Black Death, People, Property, and Profit. So that book will be out sometime either in February or March. So we'll do an episode on that. I don't know what the myth is going to be. But again, for me, this is more an accomplishment of the podcast, and it's just myself. Because again, like a lot of the stuff that we've researched on the podcast ends up in this book, like Black Wall Street, pretty much a whole chapter. We wrote a whole chapter on that was based off the Black Wall Street episode. So a lot of that research was already done. We talked about the Lumumba. We talked about a lot of stuff we talked about in the episode is already in this book. So definitely want to shout out the crew for that. And then other than that, now I'm done sharing. On to the next one. So I don't know if you have anything else to say about that, and we can just get into the general episodes. All the accomplishments, of course.
Yeah, it's always nice to sit back and think because while we were going through the roller coaster of the year, I think it's so easy to forget the impact that these things have. And so often we talk about the impact that they have on us as individuals, but to see DMs and to get emails from folks saying that they're using these some parts of our episodes in their classrooms or that it's getting picked up in the UK, to see the work that has been able to do to really help the Pendleton too, and even just other people who we're not aware of what's taking place, just feels really good to know that the work that we're doing is for a real reason, and it continues to drive us to want to do better and to go harder. Of course, as a friend in front of me, beyond proud to see the book come out next year. Like that's gonna be
yes.
And I'm really excited to see the impact that book has on other folks. So yeah, like I feel proud of the work that we do as a collective. I'm always proud of the work that y'all do individually as well. And so to see, despite all the things that our listeners don't know that took place in all of our personal lives, to see what still came out of it is, flowers, flowers, flowers.
Yes, flowers. Definitely. I mean, Cam said it best. To look at all of our accomplishments of what we were able to, achieve in just like 3 years is kind of mind blowing to me. Sometimes you get so caught up in the same routines of life in general, whether it be work or school or doing this podcast, researching for the podcast, everything that goes into this. You kind of forget like Cam said, the impact that we're having with the work that we do. And so it's still very fresh to me to see like people actually taking our words and it having some kind of impact on an individual. It's very, it's humbling, and it's kind of just like, oh, I wonder where else, how far we can take this, and who knows?
Just the haters.
Yeah.
It's always hilarious in looking at the chat and to see the ways in which
Yeah.
folks who try to pop up in there, whether it's just to be an ass or they genuinely don't agree, and to see the ways in which others who have continuously watched us, like before any of us can even say anything, and if we do, we usually don't. To see the way other people will pull receipts from things we've done before, things that they now know or have researched because of stuff that we've talked about, and clap back. Even that always astounds me. I just be sitting back on YouTube, looking in the comments like, you know.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm really proud of the accomplishments and everything. Like, Chicago was a big deal, and like you said, just the impact that we have. Like Black mentioned, you know, somebody quoting us in France. Like, they quoted something I said, and I was like, all right. Like, it's just dope that we can have that kind of impact, and we can, you know, and I'm really happy to say, like, the stuff that I've learned from the podcast, I get to use like in my everyday conversations with people. Like, I had a conversation with a coworker who said something about crack baby, and then I got to instruct him on how that's like not a real thing anymore. Like, that's not. And he looked at the research that I actually brought to him and showed him. He was like, "Oh wow, so that's not okay, cool." And I showed him the articles that we had researched and everything, and you know, and I was like, okay, that's one less person that's using that term, you know, going forward. And that's an accomplishment for me.
Yeah. And if I could just add one last thing, I think I've said this in a conversation with my fellow co-host, but I never said this on camera. But you don't realize how much this work changes you. Like it's like the transformation is subtle, at least for me. And then next thing you know, say I'm in a random coffee shop having a conversation with somebody from a different college who has a PhD, and I'm just keeping up in conversation with them. And I started to sit back and realize, like, oh wow, Blackness has really changed me, or maybe gave me a confidence I didn't know I had. But either way, I appreciate this journey and this whole process. That's all I gotta say.
I didn't know it was on mute, but no, that's good to hear. I mean, yeah, you're right. Like I said, even with the book, like the book, because it's like when we first started this, I still practice as a poet. I know I'm like the most quiet, non-promoting poet ever, but I still practice as a poet. Like, nobody knows this.
I was like, quiet.
But,
I let you cook. Okay, that makes sense now. Because I was like, you're not a quiet person. But continue.
but like the but no, like when we first started, you know, that's probably what I wrote also, was poetry. I didn't write a lot of essays or monologues. But when we started doing a show, I had to write monologues. So I used to have to take all the stuff we read and I'd have to write something on it, which most of the time when I was younger, that was poetry. But so I had to write like more formal stuff. And then all the monologues, you know, I started writing essays, and then it just kind of progressed into a book. But again, sometimes like a month of research, I'm like I know when we did a Lumumba episode, even going all back to last year, I knew I wanted to read that book for what potentially might have been our book. We hadn't got approved yet. So it was just cool to be able to integrate that into the pod. But it's like Ryan said, that you develop these skills, you know, that you might have had a little bit of, but you were able to sharpen them and fine tune them by doing this, you know. So yeah, we're gonna get into the episodes, just a rundown. We're gonna have a commentary on it. We'll be out of here. All right, so the first episode of the year, we already alluded to this several times. The myth was Lumumba was assassinated because he was a communist. I'm gonna lay out the general argument, and then we'll comment on our thoughts from it. So basically, Patrice Lumumba, who was the prime minister of the Congo in 1960, was assassinated within less than a year, really like 6 months of being over the Congo after they had independence for about 10 days, and then the Belgians came back. So that episode documented how United States, particularly the CIA, in concert with the Belgian government and even some help from the British, ran a smear campaign to say that Patrice Lumumba was tight with the communists, and in this context would have been tight with the Soviet Union, and therefore, regardless of him being democratically elected by his country, needed to be removed because he was a threat, because communism was considered a threat at this time, right? Patrice Lumumba was not a communist. If he was, there's really no problem with that at all. But the point of the episode was to show how communism is used as a smear campaign against African leaders who simply just wanted to control the resources of their country and allow those resources to benefit the actual people who live there. So, you hear today a little bit, not a lot, about the Congo, where people are like, well, I hate this response, but when people start talking about Palestine, folks be like, well, what about the Congo? It's like, you never gave a shit about the Congo either. You were only bringing it up because, you're a contrarian for life. But, this episode also documents like what the history of the Congo, like these are two really in-depth episodes that we ourselves did. We didn't even bring in a guest for that. We dealt with the history of the Congo, how Patrice Lumumba, how he evolved himself, the speech that he gave, obviously that was cold, against the Belgian government, the way the United States created this smear campaign and set him up. And then we're ultimately involved in his assassination, despite them trying to say they didn't have anything to do with it. The author of the book was able to uncover even new evidence that showed that they knew exactly where he was at the time of his assassination. This was important, again, last point, because there could have been a different world had African leaders who were getting independence in African countries, who got independence, had actually been able to maintain their independence and utilize their resources for not only their people, but for the overall continent, because Patrice Lumumba was a Pan-Africanist, and was trying to work with Kwame Nkrumah and others, to utilize the Congo for the whole continent as well as for them, whether that was under communism, socialism, capitalism, whatever. That was their main goal. So I say this was probably my favorite episode that we did that wasn't an interview. The interviews are a different approach, but like the level of research and the book we use, White Malice. Somebody was talking to somebody the other day, and we were on Zoom, and he was like, "Yo, that episode was dope," and he actually bought the book, and I saw the book, and y'all know I don't read physical books; I always read them on my phone. So I didn't realize the book is like as big as my screen. Like, I didn't realize like it was wild to think that I read that book like 2.5 times, so it was like wild to believe, because it was like 3 Bibles on top of each other, basically.
It is a long book.
Yeah, but it's a
Definitely.
good one. It's a good. I didn't really find it hard to read or anything, but it was just wild. Because sometimes I don't realize how many pages are in things. But yeah, that's y'all can comment on how you felt about that one.
Well, for me, just to comment on your point about the book. If anybody checks out that book, it also adds more context of what's been happening in the Congo. The Congo has been through some shit. Let me tell you, has been through. And to go into that episode, understanding the history of the Congo, and just also using our knowledge of American imperialism, also behooves us as Black leftists to keep international approach. To see the extent to which American governments also collaborating with other European governments, the extent they're willing to go to quell an insurgency. You also we have to maintain an international perspective, because one, you get to see how dirty America really is when you look at developing nations, third world countries, and art. The way that we've treated them over the years, but also at the same time, oppression, we're all linked, especially if you're going to be a Pan-Africanist, we're all linked. And our oppression, my oppression, is your oppression. Especially in the light of everything that's been going on in Palestine, to understand that how the American government funds Israeli occupation in the billions. I mean, but this is nothing new. This has been happening for a very long time. And I appreciate that episode for reminding me, like, oh yeah, the CIA, every extension of the state, they play dirty. And they're willing to go to certain lengths to make sure that any revolutionary is, eliminated.
Yeah, when it's often a conversation in any circle that gets to talking about Africa, when you really question how the most vibrant and nutrient-rich continent can be in such disarray. And I think oftentimes it turns into a finger-pointing situation when in reality it has been a collective of fucked up people throughout history in Europe, and especially in this blood-soaked country, who are actively working to continue to destabilize anything that is aiming to create unity, to create direction. And whenever you look at the work that's being done to combat that, it makes sense. And so, like, coming back to this episode, we listening back to it is hilarious. We was like, it got flipped by friends and all kind of shit was getting plotted on.
The betrayal was wild.
The actual story itself, like, reads like some crazy ass shit that you would think would only happen in a movie, but it just further reminded us of, like, just how impactful it can and will be when Africa is able to completely unite and be able to have self-determination in that capacity. And it makes sense why that is something that the United States, that Europe, that at this time, that they didn't want it. And to see the state that it's in now, it just, like, further pushes me to have respect for people who are fighting on any and all levels. Because I think so often when you see things like this happening day after day, century after century, over and over and over, it's easy to think of, like, just quitting. And so I think just even thinking back to this episode and thinking to the work that we see take place on a daily, for all the ways in which people call out everybody's attempts at organization and mobilization and protest and all of the above, this was just a reminder for me thinking back to this of, like, why it's important to, one, have clarity and understanding of, like, what's actually taking place, and two, ensuring that in some capacities that you learn from what has already happened, because I think it's easy to get confused and for folks to just be like, yeah, we just figured it out now, when, like, we've already seen blueprints of this for a very, very long time, and we should just be learning and being able to organize to move forward. This episode was a very, very special one.
No, only thing I was going to say after everything y'all said about it is more than enough. Patrice Lumumba had the greatest diss record of all time with that speech.
I was waiting for you to say that.
When Pac said, "First off, fuck your bitch and the clique you play," that was him channeling Patrice right there. That's all I'm saying. Like,
yeah, for much worse reasons, but yeah. Patrice was talking to the Belgian government. Tupac was talking to probably a CIA conjured, East Coast, West Coast beef. But
But it was that type of energy is what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Like,
Yeah,
bro,
yeah.
the
Yeah.
greatest diss track of all time was a speech.
yeah,
And you should go back and
Rasul
listen to it.
Rasul did a great job of reading it too.
Oh my God.
Because remember, it's because he does his speech in French, but talking about Patrice.
Yeah.
So Rasul read it for us in English. But even when you hear it in French, it's like
Bro, the energy
you don't
was
even
there.
really got to know the words. You still like, yeah, I feel it. You know what I'm saying? Like just the way, just the
Yeah,
way
nigga talking
he
that
delivered
shit.
it. Yeah, like you just felt it. But yeah, I think one last point. I had to go back and look at some notes, but part of the reason we did that was every year people do their Dr. King was a radical. Like I really I talked about this when I was on LDI. It gets on my nerves to hear people who already know that do that same stick every year. I think we already know that. So for me, it's kind of like, again, the people for our audiences, I think they know that. And then, but Patrice was assassinated on January 17th, and we often celebrate Dr. King's Day, which is fine, which is on the first Monday of that same week. This year, I think is on the 15th. So we wanted to take a different approach to put, like Ryan said, to push the international side of it too. Like, why don't we ever think about it? Why don't we ever think about this time and take our time to really like sit with that this is when he was assassinated, Malcolm X said this was the greatest, African leader ever produced, so what does that say? Like, we need to sit with that. No knock on Dr. King. It's just having a different type of conversation, Anyway, the next one, which was trying to kind of follow through from what we talked about in the Lumumba episode, was the myth was Afrocentricity equals Pan-Africanism. That was with Dr. Layla Brown. That was me and her sat down for an interview. That was in February of this year. That one, primarily the myth itself, people often conflate Afrocentricity and Pan-Africanism, particularly the more revolutionary form of Pan-Africanism. So Pan-Africanism and Afrocentricity all become just a vibe of being pro-Black and just wearing like African garb. And there's not a real distinction of Pan-Africanism being an actual political goal. If you take the Nkrumah's Torea's version of it, unified Africa under scientific socialism, right? And that's the tradition that Dr. Layla Brown came out of. Afrocentricity is a way of understanding your identity as an African person within the diaspora, and a way of and even a way of knowing, and an epistemology of knowledge, right? So it's like, if there were some distinctions, and we went through the debate between Malefi Asante and Kwame Ture, who had a debate about these two things and what the differences were. So without getting into doing the whole episode over again, I would encourage people to go back and listen to that. That one actually low key did pretty well. The numbers, I think people on BPM particularly appreciated that conversation. There was some people that was mad, but that's BPM. So it is what it is. Number 3 was Tough on Crime. That was another one we all did together. That one was the primary argument there was, the things that actually end crime are not putting people in prisons and building and giving the police more money and and creating a more repressive police state. That actually doesn't, there's no statistics that demonstrate that works, right? So to actually be tough on crime would actually be to give people like resources and take care of them, right? So tough on crime as a logic doesn't even hold up, like once you like get into it intellectually. So we dealt with that, and then got into some of the stuff we actually covered in the Crack Baby episodes. I remember that episode I had to cut back because I was basically going to redo that episode, but like it was able to show like these things don't really hold up. And then
Tough on crime, tough on poverty and stuff that causes crime, the actual social.
Yeah.
That's basically.
Yeah. And tough on crime was never really meta to reduce crime when you look back at where the origins of that that kind of logic. That shit's just a dog whistle at best to, to do other things, right? So, but I think I remember I said at the beginning of the episode, to continue that logic with tough on crime is like people who beat their kids and think that that's gonna, make them better in the end, even though all evidence shows that doesn't really improve children the way that people think it does. But it's just it's kind of a old school logic that if you are really hard on someone, that will produce better behavior and that will produce a better type of person. And if not just hard, like even verbally, but if you beat them and you assault them and you lock them up and you put them through all this trauma, that they're going to come out better on the other side. That's the similar kind of logic there. Torture works, the myth that torture works, that was actually supposed to be Tough on Crime Part 2. And I remember I changed it at the end because after listening to the interviews on that episode were from the Pendleton 2, and they talked about, this is particularly them talking about their time spent under solitary confinement and what that really meant, and that's tough to listen to. And a lot of that, some of that was in the documentary, some of it wasn't, because I couldn't fit everything in there. So we dumped it on this episode. But it goes to that same logic of tough on crime, that if you are, if you torture people, that they will somehow like behave better. And then also this idea that will stop, that if you repress them and treat them like shit, that they will stop resisting. And that didn't happen either. Right. So the Pendleton 2, they weren't broken by this, right? But the United States likes to say torture works, even though they say they don't support it at the same time. And then Prisons Rehabilitate was a reaction to the Pendleton 2 documentary. We did a lot of so-called crime-related stuff this year. But that was when we just sat and we watched it all before we got on. We watched the documentary. And me and Terrell, since we go to a lot of screenings for the committee, you've probably seen the documentary a million times at this point. But we watched the documentary and just provided our reactions, because again, I think for me, even though I've seen it obviously probably more than anyone else, it never doesn't not hit, because it's just, it's still, just to hear the story itself just sucks. So
yeah, that episode is actually one of my favorite episodes. First of all, I just want to commend you, Terrell, and the whole Pendleton 2 Defense Committee for producing a phenomenal documentary. It was a privilege to kind of get like the background, to see the first iteration of it, and then see the final product after the editing and you go in there and two black working is magic. But as far as the episode goes, to see the episode that we recorded, it's probably one of I think collectively our rawest episode. A lot of raw emotion, a lot of raw reactions, especially that part where Two Black read a letter from, I believe it was one of somebody who follows us, right?
Oh man,
the son is in prison.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
The son is in prison, and just to see, not to see, sorry, but to hear and read about the torture that this young man has been going through.
Yeah, it was his mother that hit me up and wanted us to see if we could do something. So yeah, we read that letter. That was rough.
Yeah, that was a rough episode. The torture, the dehumanization that prisoners go through, and sometimes that is a class of people that are forgotten about or just swept underneath the rug. But Pendleton 2, that whole episode, the reaction episode, as hard as it was to look at that documentary again and to listen to that email that Two Black read off to us, it kind of just reminds us why we're here and what our mission is, to make sure that we always tell those stories of the people, especially within our Black radical tradition, who don't get told, those stories that don't get told, they get swept underneath the rug, they get whitewashed or airbrushed, to quote Joy James. And to also remember that prisoners have agency. These individuals, these men were able to organize themselves. They were able to mobilize themselves. They were able to depend on them, each other, form networks of support. And this riot went off, and they was able to risk themselves, because I mean, when you're in prison, you don't have much to give but other than yourself. So
True.
they're risking their lives to make sure that the facility, everything in the prison, all the atrocities they experience, to improve that for other prisoners, especially the next prisoners that come through, have a list of demands, and then to take I think one guard or a couple guards hostage, but you had to do
It was several guards hostage.
several guards hostage, but still they had to do what they had to do,
and to treat them with humanity in a capacity where that was not being shown to them on a daily
at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So exactly. Even guards as hostages who they knew were not. We're literally having to go against the desires of their own brothers who were like, nah, like this motherfucker has done me dirty time and time again. Like, I'm trying to get my lick back. And they were like, no, like we need to do this for the betterment of each other. Even knowing the potential consequences and the consequences that did come for many of them after that, and how hard it was going to be to see the ways in which they were willing to not just put their bodies and their lives on the line. And to see even afterwards, to ask them, like, would you do it again? If they was like, I'll do it again. We have done it again. We've done more strikes. More things have taken place time and time again, because the conditions are not changing. And until they do, I shared that episode with my dad, who has spent a lot of time locked up and in conversation. And I talked about in that episode of how important that was to me, because so often, if anybody has had family who have been locked up, when they come home, they typically don't talk about what happens.
No.
At all. It's like they're going to war and they come back changed people, and the things in which that they experience. Many of us, without others sharing their stories, or if you're blessed enough, love that somebody's FaceTiming me. But yeah, to just know the ways in which they were willing to really ride for each other, just was a reminder of like the fact that this wasn't just one story. Like we talked about seeing articles and being connected with folks from all over who have gone through similar things. Like this story resonated from plenty of things that I've seen take place in LA County, where I grew up, in prisons there. And so I just think if there was an episode that I think beyond anything was probably the most important to us as individuals, like it would be this one, and the work that has been able to take place since then, and that is still going on to bring them home, and not just for them, but for others as well. The pressure will continue to be applied. Just makes me feel really proud. Hearing that letter be read out was devastating.
Yeah, especially after watching all that. I remember I didn't know where to put that, because I was like, if I put it at the beginning, it's gonna hit so hard, it's gonna be hard to finish the episode. And if I put it at the end, it was one of those ones where, you just had to just suck it up. I will say though, even doing this, work for the Penalty 2 outside of the pod, you have to learn to put whatever bothers you. It doesn't matter. It's not that it doesn't matter at all, but you have to learn to like put that secondary to them, and I think all too often there's this tendency to be like, well, this is so heartbreaking, I can't do it, or it's just too much. And it's like, well, they're the ones that's in prison. I'm just reading about it, so I'm not saying you shouldn't feel anything. You should, but it's just like, they're the ones that actually fought the cops and stabbed people in self-defense and saved a man's life, and they're the ones that did that. Like, we are reading about it, so it often gets on my nerves. Even when we've done panels, like I did a panel the other week, and I think the people meant well, but they're asking me and my co-director, like, how are we taking care of ourselves, and how are we, dealing with this? I'm like, well, they the ones in prison, yo. Like, Like that's you should be asking us about them. You know, like we sitting here with y'all free technically. You know, at least more free than they are. You know, so it's like it's easy to get caught up in the suffering that they went through, but it's also their resilience, and not in a kind of like caricature sense of resilience, but the fact that they are dedicated to something bigger than themselves, and I think we have to find that more so for ourselves when we're bothered by the way that the state of the world. I mean that does weigh on everybody, but it's just I think sometimes we can become way too self-absorbed about how it bothers us, like particularly when we're not the ones primarily even experiencing it, right? And I think that happens with the Pendleton too. Is like that's why I was like, yo, we need to just do a reaction. We could do a whole analysis of it. Like we just needed to recognize like this story happened, this story in this form, and to get more people to see it so we can actually get them out, as opposed to being like, oh my God, it's so sad. I mean, like you don't need our show to tell you that.
Yeah.
I'm still standing on what we discussed when we recorded. They are heroes, and that's where I'm leaving that at. Like, they are heroes for what they did, they continue to do, and it's freedom till they free.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, hopefully by next year we talking about getting them out. Like we're talking about them having gotten out, or we actually have them on the show, not through a prison call, but we can talk to them in person or on through these kind of technologies, But yeah, definitely heroes. And if we say they're heroes, and we should stand by our heroes as opposed to acting like they don't exist. Like this is what gets on my nerves. Again, it's just like today I saw Jonathan Majors, who I'm gonna say was, I think his career is over, was a good actor. He just got found guilty for assault or whatever. And then I see this outpouring of people online like, oh, protect the black man, da, da, da. And again, I get the algorithm. I get, a lot of us are conditioned to not pay attention to other shit, but it does annoy me knowing the Pendleton 2 exists to see people like come to the defense of dudes who beat up on women, dudes who, come to the defense of these celebrities or whatever, and they don't have that kind of smoke for people who really put their lives on the line. And that just shows you the state of where things are. You don't have that kind of smoke, but you want to form a Twitter space and talk about the injustice against black men when somebody's found guilty of messing with a white woman. Like it's just that kind of shit gets on my nerves, knowing what these kind of gentlemen go through. And that's why I tell people to join organizations and to get involved in stuff, because a lot of that shit becomes way less relevant when you are doing real work. And it's harder to be distracted by that when you're doing real work. And I, as someone who wasn't always doing that kind of shit, it was much easier to have that kind of discussion about celebrities and use that as my measuring stick for injustice, because I wasn't really involved in much. Next one was the one we did in person. This is the myth of the circulating black dollar. We can reflect on experience just real quickly. I state the argument or what we debunked. We did the myth of the circulating black dollar at DePaul University. Again, the general argument was that there was this dollar that circulates for only 6 hours in the black community and has a much longer time in other places. And it came out of this book called Talking Dollars and Making Sense. I think I said on the episode, it did neither.
Oh yeah, it says the lifespan of a dollar in the Asian community is 28 days. In the Jewish community, the lifespan of a dollar is 19 days. Yes. And the lifespan of the African American dollar is approximately 6 hours.
6 whole hours.
And it's just so funny because without walking through the whole episode again, you really then have to question to yourself, like, what defines community? What defines Asian community? Like, the Asian continent is not just a monolith. The Jewish community is not a monolith. The Black community is not. How are you tracking this magical 6 hours? What are you doing? Where are the receipts, since we're talking about money?
There are
receipts to back this up.
I love doing the research for this episode, because while reading this episode, I was like, yeah, this is kind of stupid. Like, what in the world? I was like, epiphany, like, yeah, what?
Yeah, it was Ray found that in the Asian community, a dollar circulates among the community's banks, brokers and shopkeepers and business professionals for up to 28 days before it's spent with outsiders. Again, we showed out in that episode that Asian can mean a lot of different things. So okay. In the Jewish community, the circulation was 19 days. And those 19 days in the WASP community, 17 days, but in the African American community, 6 hours.
And we also talk about what kind of technology would you have to use to even track that? Like, how would you do that? And how were you able to track that during the time what Black Wall Street was popping? Like, there's so many questions preparing for this episode.
The fundamental point was if money's not leaving your community is fucking broke. That's the point. Like, this makes no sense.
Right.
Because quite literally, if I wanted, like, when I go down the street to get food, it was not grown in my backyard. So the money is going to have to pay. The money I spend out of my pocket is going to have to go to a butcher somewhere or a farmer somewhere anyway, because no community, quote unquote, whatever even community means, if you draw a border, has every sustainable need that it would need within that area. Things are exported and imported all the time. You don't have everything you need to sustain yourself. So money always leaves the community.
Always.
It's not black and white. Some money stays in the community, some goes. That's how anything works. If you want to build a house,
you have a very limited community with limited resources.
Yeah.
I was cracking up. What foolishness did I say at DePaul? I was like, buying your cousin's ugly ass T-shirt is not gonna get us free.
No.
You know, can I just interject for a second?
$75, right? That's $75. Yeah.
If I can interject for a second. During the whole time in Chicago, I don't know. It's unfortunate it's not a camera, but there's times where I was like looking over at Cam because Cam was shining in that episode. Cam was just going. I was like, well done. I was like, salute, well done.
Frustrated. This was really one of those things. And mind you, like, y'all know, if I can buy from a Black business, because, and we said this in the episode too, like, although the myth itself is false, the desire to support our community is a real thing. The desire for Black folks to be able to control the wealth and control the means of productions within our own communities, as a means to better support one another, is a real thing. I actively try to buy from other Black people, but I'm doing so because I care. And even if I don't think it's going to save us all, like, your baby is gonna go to basketball camp. Great. I'm glad. Like, you got gas in your car. Great. I'm glad. But to think that, and to condemn people, that's what really gets me sick. It's not the people who have a desire in their heart for us to be a stronger collective. It's the people who then call other people out. Well, you didn't support, and you buy things from here. Like, shut the fuck up. And that's what I think. The more we was reading all the foolishness, it just was making me mad. So
it's like Ryan said. I think Ryan said there are some things that we've investigated that have some legitimacy. They've maybe been misunderstood. It's gotten misconstrued over the years. It's gotten exaggerated. This has no basis.
Exactly.
So, like,
and when asked where she got the research from, she gave such vague explanations. Some research facility.
And there's no. I'm gonna put it on the screen because I found the screenshot of the book, but there's no source. Like, she doesn't source it. Like, there's no source.
Bell hooks.
There's no, look right here. She says there's no source. There's no, like, nothing at the end of the sentence. Nothing. There's nothing. There's no source. So you make a claim that broad. That's if she somehow found that out. Tremendous research. If you actually was able to break it down that intricately, no source, nothing.
She did it by herself.
And so everybody's claim that they say is based on a book in which there is no source. She does not tell us where she got any of this information from. And like I said, it doesn't even make sense anyway. Because again, if you are living in any community, unless you have an actual commune in which everything is built and made in there, you are going to import and export things. So the dollar leaves probably in most cases more than 6 hours. It probably leaves in like a half an hour. Because the moment I swipe my card, it got to go somewhere to pay somebody else. So it's like, it's always leaving. That's how money actually circulating means it's going everywhere. It doesn't mean it stays in one neighborhood. That doesn't, like, this is capitalism. This isn't some feudal society. You know what I mean? So like, what are we talking about? Even if it was a social society, the money would leave your fucking community because you probably need shit from this area that isn't growed here.
Trade will still take place.
Yeah. Like, come on, man. So
money,
we was in Chicago.
Money not being able to leave a community like in Cuba is the reason why Cuba hasn't been able to progress like they want to.
Yeah, they can't spend with nobody. Yeah, because they got exactly. Great point. They can't spend with nobody.
If you think of it like
definitely,
that's that.
Yeah. Not being able to spend is sanctions, basically, right? Like it's so it's like you got sanctions, or you just have a community that's completely divested and blighted by city planning or whatever. They don't have any power to get any investments or any kind of like infrastructure build or whatever. But like, no, it doesn't make any sense.
Yes. Public service announcement from the Black Mist podcast. Please stop with this narrative. Stop.
This one probably gets on my nerves more than anything.
Stop. No more music videos about it. No more commercials about it. No, we don't care about your t-shirts.
Is it weird that this one that we debunked so easily is one of the ones that people cling to so hard? Like,
no song. Yes.
Yeah,
like matter of fact.
Defending capitalism with your whole heart.
Like, bro, the myths that we just flat out disproved easily, as much research as we put into it, easily disproved. These are the ones that people come to the hardest.
I remember leaving a comment underneath somebody's Instagram because she was doing some black dollar circulating type of deal, referencing the same figures that I remember. I commented underneath it, and then Cam came up and she's like, "Yeah, this is a myth." And then Cam hit me up, she's like, "Drop the episode link." I was like, "All right." It's like we were double teaming.
We really normally stay out the comments, but Ryan was feeling spicy that day. So I was like, "Listen, you want to pour the gas? We can just light it up." And she was like, "Well, where's your proof?" And we was like, "Well, how about you go listen?"
Yes, exactly. That's what she said to me. Instead of saying something is a myth, where something has been proven over and over again, where's your sources? And I was like,
"Yeah, we ain't making it didn't happen." Like this needs to be put to bed. Yeah. It doesn't. It defies all logic. Again, like Cam said, we always try to hold space that we get people's desire, and that's how these things get mixed up. People, black folks that want to support each other, that want to see black people do well, totally feel you on that. But part of why we come so hard is that we want to see y'all do well too, and believing in this bullshit is not helping you do well. It's only boosting up a few business owners that get rich off of pushing this kind of nonsense, whether they know it's nonsense or not, and that's it, and it's just.
I heard somebody say this week, it was like, in order for black businesses to thrive, you need to do stuff outside of the black community. I mean, you need to be servicing more than just the black community,
especially us.
So your money has to go out.
You want more. You should want more people than just the people in your community. I need more people than just people on my block to buy something if I had a business.
Right. I mean, that's literally the point.
Can you imagine?
This is used to blame black people for a bunch of stereotypes that were made up by white folks. So black people don't support each other. Black people are lazy. Black people are frivolous in their spending patterns, which also can be debunked too. But so it's like all that. This often backs that up, and it wastes a lot of energy. Like it wastes. People really put in for this. It wastes a lot of energy. So like kind of what we talking about the Pendleton too. Not to make that the standard of everything either, but it's just to say like the energy that goes into black business. Imagine if that went into political prisoners.
The point of us having a podcast was because we were having these conversations with
niggas on the block.
And
Really just each other, yeah.
And we were like, actually, this is information that should be shared on a wider scale so that more people, and we're not even doing this for the money. So, but I mean, if y'all want to pay us, by all means, hit us up. Bills. But
speaking
like,
of capitalism, I ain't gonna go down there.
But it was a good time, and I think it was really impactful to see the ways in which the students there engaged in conversation, the questions they asked. I think it's so. We talked about this earlier when we talked about our own thoughts throughout. We say this at least twice a year. The ways in which like we change our own thinking, the research that we do, and so to watch it happening in real time, like literally seeing wheels turning in people's heads and them asking questions to really get through to some of the things that they were now working through. As people who might potentially be either working for other businesses or have a Black-owned business or want to do or are already doing community work, I just think it was really great. It was fun. It was exciting to do. And then overall, we had a great time together in Chicago. Black was very sick of us in our carpool karaoke. But the three of us make a great karaoke group.
The chemistry, I think Kim said this at the beginning of the episode, but the chemistry is still there. There was one point in time when I was looking through all our photos from that day. There was a point we all leaned to the right and to laugh at the same time. And I was looking at that, I was like,
that's funny.
like literally we know how to play off each other. So anyway,
no, that's funny, but no, it was a good time. I mean, it was again, doing it in person is different. It's funny. Ryan remembers the original conception of Vibe was to record in person because it was prior to the pandemic and all of that. Now, obviously that didn't work out, but we've ghosted on. So
did you say we ghosted on, or do we ghost? You know what?
Ghost Recon.
Yeah,
hey, it's the end of the year, man. I don't have the same discipline, but but anyway, yeah, we've ghosted on, but no, it was good to record in person, and it was also
said it again.
It was also cool to have a conversation with other Black people about socialism, and I specifically mean other Black people. I enjoy talking to Black people about that more than anyone else. So it was good that people were, open to talking about that. And I hope to do more episodes this year, less on critiques of capitalism, but more so understanding socialism a little bit better. I think that would be a good progression from what we've done. But yeah, that was dope. We were flown out, hotel, all that shit, I should have won more games of Uno. That was the only thing that was a bit of a fluke on that trip.
Normally you won't even give me my one dub.
You didn't win.
I won one game, and all of a sudden that's not even, that don't even count.
Somehow somebody the person that's not on this call won more than all of us. But
but I'm thinking about the crazy time. Terrell had to draw 16. Was it 16, my guy? Bro.
I'm sitting there looking at all these cards just like.
Hey, the only game I won was because y'all literally all went off, and I just so happened to have a draw 4 as my last card, and I won because I just dropped the draw 4. Because otherwise, I was gonna get cooked for the same kind of thing. So yeah, that was wild. We were on on the rooftop, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, we had a time. Y'all be thinking we just be a kiki ha ha on this when we're on all the parts that we edit out.
One of my favorite parts about the Chicago trip was us having a black ass time at Harold's eating chicken.
That was a black ass time, wasn't it?
We put that as something that had to happen. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm so glad I went too.
And me and Ryan had way too many chicken wings.
We had way too many chicken wings.
We got 18 wings.
They was fucking them up though.
Yeah.
I took my plate home. These fools cleaned they shit.
Hey, that walk was needed, man, because we was.
Yes, it was. Oh man, that time.
Thank you to DePaul.
Paul, thank you so much.
We were glad that we were able to come out. Hope to come back.
And so the next one, actually, that after we went there, that was in May. That June, we didn't even post an episode for reasons. When we say it was a long year, that was one of those. Without getting into it, and then in July we did the third world. The myth was the third world. Talk with VJ Rashad, who's a historian, journalist, intellectual. And the myth there was just, and we had talked about this, I think, in a prior episode the year before, about people think the third world just meaning the, impoverished, underdeveloped, broken down, no real water to drink and, feed the children. That's the kind of image that people have of the third world. But the third world originally was this idea of having like a third way, and an emerging, former colonial nations who are gaining their independence, tracking their own way of doing things that wasn't tied to, the capitalist bloc of the United States in the West, or the Soviet bloc, the Soviet socialist bloc that was primarily like Eastern European countries, and obviously Russia and the Soviet Union. Now there were some other countries that joined, like Cuba and others who were part of that. So these are countries who were trying to trot their own path, that may work with those blacks, but wanted to have their own independence. So they formed their own kind of like third world bloc, also known as non-alignment movement. Those aren't synonymous, but they're close enough. Those two, not non-alignment and third world. So VJ really just broke down that, how one, like what originally was, and then he gave at the end. I was like, so how did it get misunderstood? And he actually blamed the song. It was funny. We Are the World. He said that song really had a lot to do with the misunderstanding, because that song gathered together, and they really did present a lot of. He said they met well. He said he was friends with, Harry Belafonte, but he was like that song really contributed a lot to this kind of dissemination of, the global South being this place of poverty, and the third world means somehow a lesser world. That wasn't what people made it. Third world was actually a positive, say we are going to start our own world that's not within this kind of framework. So I think that was just a great interview. Reading his book, The Darker Nations, I would suggest anybody go back to that. There was the Black Mecca episode, but that was the first time y'all had to do one without me as the primary researcher. I'm interested how that went. And then there was the part two. We talked to Kamal Franklin, who's one of our BPM comrades, and talked about Cop City, but Black Mecca in general, where people were talking about Atlanta, and Atlanta being this Black Mecca, this Wakanda, this home of Black excellence and greatness and all of those things. And so we debunked the idea that it represents that. There might be portions of that for certain Black people, but and got into the history of how it even became Black Mecca, and how that was more of a marketing strategy more than it was anything else. And then obviously again with part two, we come out, we were able to get into the weeds of Cop City. I think me and Cam were on that episode. So I don't know if y'all want to talk about that one, since y'all had to carry that one, because I don't know. Oh, I was finishing the book, that's why I couldn't do that one. I literally was just like, I don't have time to like do that research and finish the book. It was just like, I didn't want to shortchange anything, so I just didn't do it.
I think we did that episode really well. And we shut some shit down because there are way better examples of quote unquote Black Mecca than Atlanta. As far as like, I think we discussed what Harlem, during the Harlem Renaissance and everything, and moving forward, with all that. And Atlanta's just not that. It's like, simply put, it's just not that. as much as you might like Atlanta, have fun in Atlanta, it ain't that.
But you ain't never lived in Atlanta. How you gonna tell me? It's just,
You know, my your politicians are to blame. So start with that first.
you ain't never lived down here, so how you getting? You can't say nothing. You ain't never lived here. Hmm.
Because of what I've seen, I won't be living down there.
Yeah, Black Mecca episode, that, oh my goodness, that whole month, that was a rough month for me. But that was the first, I think it was that's the first episode we've done without Black, and me taking on like the research part with the book, Black Mecca, that gives a history of Atlanta. It kind of just, for me, cemented the idea of, just because you have Black politicians, Black city council, Black mayor, does not mean that you're going to gain any type of resources, rights, or anything that looks like equality for poor and working class Blacks. One of the, I feel like, the most poignant examples in that episode when we talk about the Atlanta child murders and how it was Black women in these Black neighborhoods, poor and working class Black women, who had to take it upon themselves to investigate the child murders and figure out what was going on, because the police weren't going to do their job. And it was because of their work that they was actually able to pinpoint and figure out who was murdering these children. But that's one of many examples in that episode, as we in that book, and I encourage anybody to go check out that Black Mecca book, of just Black poor and working class people getting the shaft, but then them expressing their own agency and taking power and taking it amongst themselves to do what we've always done, make a way out of no way.
I mean, the Black Mecca, where you can build a huge facility to train police in a community that you didn't get their input, say so, or anything
at all.
That's Mecca. That's what we're calling. Okay, all right, bet.
And then use their tax dollars to fund the project.
Use their tax dollars to fund it.
A Black Mecca, but when Atlanta was trying to get the Olympics, you had over 9,000 Black folks who were displaced and locked up without charges and just arrested and kicked off of their own homes because other Black folks who advocated for the Olympics to come to Atlanta wanted to showcase a pristine image of what Black Atlanta looks like. And so, yeah, I think this episode was something that we were just like, no shade to Black people in Atlanta. Like, that doesn't mean that there aren't things that have happened in Georgia as a whole. It's also just hilarious. Like, niggas discredit the whole state for one tiny ass little city. When real work has happened in both Atlanta and the state as a whole throughout history, but it is not a Mecca, and it's not and for who? Especially when we look at now, when we led into part 2 with Kamal and talking about Cop City and really getting into the nitty gritty of how that even came to be, and seeing the ways in which, once again, the input of the people are being ignored, how people are literally, how they're trying to destabilize the movement by throwing out federal charges at folks, RICO charges. And so that episode was not, and we can, I saw some of the comments where people were like, y'all just like, what's the big beef with Atlanta? And it's not that. It's to once again let it be known that across the country, Black folks have actively fought for spaces for us to be safe, to be cared for, to thrive, to support each other, without there needing to be
all Black people.
Something that discusses and makes decisions for the whole, or as the example for the whole, the priorities, the needs, et cetera, that we've talked about in multiple episodes change. And so when we really got into why that's problematic, and really then dove into Cop City and how the aim is to then set a tone for more cop cities to pop up all over, how we really need to be moving away from these divisive narratives and like really focus on what's important and what's taking place and being cognizant of who um, is participating in this. You know, we haven't done all skin folk and kinfolk because that's not really something we need to debunk. But I think it is something that we constantly talk about. That like
we kind of did that episode with last year, kind of
a smidget.
I think it was everybody. I think it was rooting for everybody.
For everybody black. You're right.
Yeah.
But focusing on the fact that like the people that are supposed to be our black leaders, not everybody is actually advocating for things that will lead us to liberation. And it's important to recognize that. It's important to see that, and not just, especially when we talk about what's happening in Atlanta. Atlanta's had black leaders for a very, very long time, and it has just been leading people into pits of fiery hell.
Yep, past 50 years, I want to say, right?
Not everybody, but a lot of folks. And so it's really important that like when these big claims are being thrown out, that they're being interrogated and you're really paying attention to who and what is talking and how they're moving.
Yeah.
It's like,
I was going to say one thing, but the episode resonated with me because there was one point in time when I was way younger when I used to actually believe that Atlanta was the Black Mecca, and I'm glad to come to this point to have that debunked. You know, some people, I don't want to go on a flaw, but some people, you know, they cling to an idea and they'll just keep to that idea until forever, until the age. And I'm glad that this podcast, like I said at the beginning of this episode, kind of just transform you over amount of time, even if it's subtle, and just to have that completely debunked with actual facts and statistics and understanding power dynamics between the class of Black people. I'm just appreciative of that episode. That's it. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, I think it's just there can't be a Black Mecca in a colony. So it's like if the United States is what we understand it to be, then how could there be a Black Mecca? Like that's just a major contradiction. There can't be a Black Mecca in a colony. You know, there can be places where Black folks, you know, limited places where Black people can enjoy themselves and maybe find some decent quality of life. But to assume, to say there was a Black Mecca would, to me, you would have to be able to say that like post some kind of revolution. You can't say you live in this country, this settler colony, and there's a Black Mecca. And also that Black Mecca vibe shit, I think Erica was saying this to me. There's a weird vibe sometimes where I know we want those things, but you look at something like Israel, which we're gonna get to, and you get this ethno state that's made specifically for a certain group of people. And seeing how that's turned out, I don't know if that's necessarily anything people should strive for. Because like seeing that kind of what kind of people that, like what kind of mentality that puts in people, I should say, you know, where you have folks who, you know, are very supportive of genocide and such because they believe that that's the only place they can be safe. You know, is this one place and defending it at all means, regardless of who suffers. I don't know. Again, I'm not saying that Black people necessarily on that level. I don't think we are, but I do think if you follow that kind of logic, you can end up in that kind of place, personally. And that's not to say we shouldn't have Black spaces or anything. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about this idea that we have this one hub that protects all of us that can lead to some cult-like shit, as we see with Israel. And I don't think anybody's invulnerable to that. The next one, forgot about this one. Was a debate between me and Dr. Ball. The debate was pooling Black resources is imperative to liberation. This one was cool. I think we had tried a debate years ago, and we tried to do it live, and we tried to invite a lot of people at once, and without getting into how that collapsed, a lot of people always compliment us for that episode. It was a community control of the police episode or debate that we did. We had invited people on. Me and Cam were not supposed to be debating. We were just supposed to host it. The people we invited on were unable to make it for reasons we won't get into. So we had to basically set up a mock debate with what was effectively the judges of that debate. And it was a live episode. So, we had to kind of make it up on the cuff. So this time we said we're not doing it live for one, because and we called on a more reliable person in Dr. Ball that we knew is very unlikely to cancel. So and it was in relationship to his book, Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power, but was not limited to that, as I stated in the debate. The point was not to really like go for the gusto. I just want to have a strong argument. So but the point of the debate, to get in the content of the actual things that we were talking about, I can give my opinion on how it went, was just to show that there's sometimes, I think, a flaw, and you can criticize, Black capitalists and the stuff we've been talking about earlier. And you can say, Black people don't have any money, or Black people don't have this and all that. But there does need to be a conversation about what do you do with the resources that you have, whether that's the money you have, whether that's the space you live in, whether that's access to different things. Like, what do we do with those resources? So that was the kind of heart of the debate, was like what to do with those resources. So we didn't vote on who won or anything, but that was the back and forth that me and Dr. Ball had. And I think there was some challenges for him when I didn't take the kind of Black capitalist argument. I was like, no, we define resources very broadly, liberation within a socialist lens, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, y'all can give your responses to that if you have any, or we can just move to the next one.
We had a time.
We did have a time.
I think because, one, the five of us all speak very frequently, that it's one of those things where we talk about in the episodes, we're like, we have these conversations, we have these debates, we go back and forth with each other on things that don't always have to be 100% right or 100% wrong frequently, which was the purpose of doing the debate. And so I think for us, hosting and giving our 2 cents and just being able to kiki about it, it's also it was also a good time to just be reminded of like how easily people can be swayed in one direction or the other, and how these myths start to get perpetuated because folks are not seeing the validity in multiple arguments, or how often in other spaces, when it should just be the same thing that took place, where there are gray areas in it, and we can have conversation about it to be able to pull out how to utilize these arguments for the betterment, it turns into a fucking ego trip in other spaces so often. And so I think this episode was such a good way of us trying to show through example of like, regardless of which way or who agrees with which position more or not, how to actually then engage in an argument, in a debate, in a manner that honors the truth in both sides. Which I mean, in a random setting, you're not going to be like timing yourselves and having a Lincoln Douglas style debate, but you should go into those type of conversations with your ego removed in order to step into it and be like, I'm coming to you from the perspective that I have, but I also can now see your perspective, and then we can go back and forth on the validity of this.
Thanks for saying that, Bugs. I forgot. I think one thing we did get a lot of we appreciate it for the format, and I think BPM overall could benefit from being a little bit more formatted when we have debates, whether that's putting a clock on things or whether that's having a clear resolution so we're all clear on what the actual disagreement is, as opposed to sometimes getting into conversations that I think sometimes we're talking past each other, and I think at least in that conversation, because again, we weren't trying to make it about me versus him and I win and he loses, that really wasn't the point. But getting into a conversation about, or a back and forth about real disagreements and trying to have a principled exchange that doesn't get into grandstanding or going off forever. Like, and I think having time limits, having an agreed upon subject matter is helpful. I know some people prefer the more chaotic approach, and sometimes I do too. So I'm not here to say above anybody on that, but I think sometimes if we actually care about the audience and we want them to learn, which was our main priority in that, was so the audience could do something, then I think having a bit more structure is helpful, as opposed to just kind of going off the cuff. I think sometimes, and I think that can be more entertaining, and that might draw more eyes for the sake of entertainment. But I think when you sat down and thought your argument through, and you go at a person who also has thought their argument through, and you clash on real like disagreements, even if it gets heated at times, I think that's just more healthy if the point actually achieve anything beyond clicks or anything of that nature. So I just, that's I would just say that.
I think
you get. What are you about to say, Terrell?
So I think we accomplished our goal with it, which was the topic of the debate. What are we doing with those resources? Because there were two different points that we're giving on, what to do, how to do, or, which way we're going to go with that. And the point, at least what I got from it was, what I learned from it was, there's different ways to approach this conversation, but it's a conversation that needs to be had. So then when we walk away from that debate, I can go and listen to it again, and I can think about this on my own. Like, okay, well, yeah, I stood on this side, but there were points that were made over here that were really good as well. And I think we accomplished what we wanted out of that debate.
Yeah.
At least I repeat what me.
Yeah, and I'll repeat what I said during that episode. Sometimes I feel like debate is kind of a lost art form. It's kind of devolved into this shouting match type of a deal that you see on social media all the time. I really commend Dr. Ball and you for engaging in this debate and having a substantive conversation. And that was cool to be a part of something like that, because it's been a long time since I've actually been in a debate or even witnessed a debate. A debate that I wanted to see, that I wanted to see. But yeah, it was a good episode. It was a good episode. I enjoyed it. You did a masterful job, Too Black, and conveying your points, and so did Dr. Ball.
I think it would be cool if BPM had, whether I'm in it or not, I just think that format would be helpful if we did it more often. I think people who have real issues with each other, it's kind of like having a ring, which is going to be actual, some real regulations. You put your boxing gloves on and you go at it. But it's not just anything goes, So next episode, second to last one of the year, was the myth was the Israel-Hamas war. That was with Rana Nazar Hamada and Musa Springer. Rana is actually Palestinian, so it was, and she said she had lost 14 members of her own family within this war. The episode itself, we called, it was supposed to be something else, but I remember I changed it once I did more research and just thought about it more deeply. The myth being the Israel-Hamas war, because framing it like that makes it seem like it's a two-sided thing, that it's equal, it's balanced, and then by calling it Hamas while Israel's bombing everyone just doesn't actually explain what's happening, right? So when you say Israel-Hamas war, but Israel is bombing, churches and hospitals and schools and refugee camps and killing their own people and killing hostages from their own and doing that, and then we're going to sit here and call this an Israel-Hamas war doesn't explain. Also, Hamas is part of a broader resistance. They might be the leaders of that resistance, but they are not the entirety of the resistance. And it also, when you call it a war, seems like Hamas or Palestine has its own state and it's going to war against Israel. But Israel stole the land, so they don't have a state. So there's that. So the way that the media, the mainstream corporate media, like frames these things makes it seem as if these are two battles, like we were talking about earlier, with some kind of debate or something, and it doesn't give a real depiction of what's happening. So that episode we were able to get into the history, that kind of, not totally, but some of the history that led up to October 7th, get a sense of what Palestinians actually lived through. Musa is I consider them a historian. They just can always break down things and just give us such dense details. So I think Musa and Rana did a great job just, bouncing off of each other. And for me as an interviewer in that episode, I really just wanted to provide space for them to break it down. I mean, even just small things like, I think I asked the question, how far is Gaza from the West Bank? Because we sometimes talk about those like different places, and it was like they're not even,
so close together.
Yeah, but people in West Bank have never been to Gaza, and vice versa. Or the and just the checkpoints, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, that episode I think we did shortly after everything popped off, October 7th. And there was a lot of people doing stuff. I know BPM had several good episodes on that. But we were glad to make our contribution. But yeah, that one, I mean, still rings. Probably will do some more on that because that's still ongoing. And I remember when I recorded for that, I was like reading the death toll, which I don't even know what it was at that point. And I was like, unfortunately, this will get much higher. And now we're looking at 20,000 people.
Yeah.
I don't even think it was at 10 yet when I read that.
It wasn't. I think if I recall, and I might be wrong, 8,000 maybe.
Yeah, something like that.
I want to say I thoroughly enjoyed this episode, and I encourage everyone listening to us to go watch both parts, part 1 and part 2 of the Israel-Hamas war. I just think it's interesting, the framing the Israel and Hamas war as like they're both equal powers fighting each other. And you realize it's not the case. Never has been the case. I mean, I want to reiterate what everybody else says. America is funding Israel. But one of the most interesting things about that episode was when I believe it was Musa who mentioned how was the prime minister of Israel who said the Hamas attack was like 20 9/11s?
Yeah, that was Netanyahu's bitch ass.
Netanyahu. So he's mentioned that, and I didn't think about this, but I think Musa brought it up, like the idea of 9/11, and then kind of the subtext surrounding that, how we use the word terrorism when it came to Islamic individuals that came and bombed us, and that language so subtle, but to make Americans and most people around the world, but mostly I think it was aimed toward Americans to gravitate toward that language. Like, okay, kind of like harken back to the time when we were attacked during 9/11, and the use of that language to galvanize people against Palestine and against Hamas.
And equate all Palestinians with terrorism. I mean, for the record,
exactly.
I equate Hamas with terrorism, but that's another conversation. But particularly to equate all Palestinians with as terrorists. Yeah.
Very well done, like I said. And even down to the idea of checkpoints. That was really interesting to me. How they're basically, it's not just you giving your ID to a police officer and them scanning it and you just driving through. You were essentially put in the cage, and you're at the discretion of Israel's military whether you can go through or not. You might not even go through. Um, it's crazy to see a lot of people try to cape for Israel, knowing that it's an apartheid happening as we speak, and it's genocide happening as we speak.
Yeah.
It's wild to me.
I mean, it's the irony is not something that I think a lot of folks can even stomach anymore. Of the fact that, you know, if there was an actual problem for with Palestinians wanting liberation, then we wouldn't see people in the press being murdered. We wouldn't see people. We would see aid getting in. We wouldn't have our government telling folks that you cannot use your voice to speak out against Palestine, or it's considered anti-Semitic, and literally trying to pass legislation against it. There wouldn't be such a visceral reaction on a policy level to squash people's ability to speak out and advocate for Palestinians if there was not something that was completely unacceptable, and that has continuously been unacceptable with Israel's illegal occupation of Palestine, and now genocide of the Palestinian people. And so I think this episode was just really great at pointing out once again that this is something that has been taking place before October 7th. This is something that has been orchestrated and supported, not just by our shitty ass governments, but others as well. And that, you know, made me, well, earlier when we were talking about the Pendleton too, we were talking about people being willing to be uncomfortable, and even for us, our willingness to be uncomfortable and having to stomach understanding and listening to their stories and the stories of others who have talked to us about, you know, their own experiences in the system. So many folks have been like, I need to take a break. There's too from seeing all of this self-care, and it's like, no, we owe it to Palestinian people to sit in that, to see what's happening to them, to share. That is literally what they're asking. All the dollars that people were sending literally can't get in. Aid is chilling in the desert. People are being slaughtered. Babies are being murdered. Men are standing up for their families on a daily and helping community. Like, we are seeing community rally in a way in which I don't think many people have experienced in a time where so much is going horrible, and where people are literally being slaughtered, and yet people are like, I can't take this. I need a break. And that's and I'm not sitting here shaming people, because it is a lot. It is a lot to stomach. I have spent many a days sobbing in my living room, trying to navigate the despair of what's not only happening in our regular daily lives, but like what is happening overseas. But it's important to know, like, this cannot be ignored. This cannot be forgotten. We cannot become desensitized to these things at all. There's no way in hell folks should be able to see photos of a genocide taking place and you be okay. Like, you should be not okay. You should be willing to speak out, and we've talked about this throughout other movements in history, that we can emphasize with people who maybe don't feel like they're in a position to risk, because we know people are getting fired, people are being arrested, all kind of shit that is taking place, that has always taken place when folks are resisting oppression. But I do still think that it's our duty to do so. And I think this episode was one where it was really discussing, like, historically folks have been speaking out, will continue to speak out, and right now we're seeing a continued aim at surveillance and destabilization, and that it's our duty to resist. And I think you said it really well earlier, where you're like, you know, our liberations are connected in so many ways than just one. And so, I mean,
Yeah. No lie, I cried listening to this episode. So, yeah,
I'm on the same page. Like, one thing that not take away from the episode, or not, you know, deter from the episode. I mean, me and Black went to a rally what was that, last month?
Yeah. We went to one downtown
We
now.
went to one downtown.
Yeah.
And,
Indianapolis for those listening.
and one thing, like I kept hearing people say, like, or at least, you know, on my feeds and stuff, people say, well, you know, that's not a Black issue. That's not a thing that we need to worry about. That's them. That's way over there. And the whole time, like, no, this is a situation that's here, where whether you know it or not, whether complacent or, you know, being complacent to it, we're contributing to what's going on over there. And you can't, it's one of those things, we can't afford to sit idle anymore. We can't afford to sit quietly. We can't, you gotta, I don't want to, like, you gotta pick a side and prefer.
Yeah, and I also want to say, be leery of bad faith actors who claim to be of an ideology, like, let's say, Pan-Africanism, and want people to earn their solidarity. Solidarity should not have to be earned. Like, it shouldn't be transactional. If I want to say that, that's what I want to say. So what if you experience some anecdotal racism again amongst some Palestinians that you know in your neighborhood, whatever? That still doesn't justify the genocide. I mean, you gotta put things into perspective. That whole "what do they do for me" bullshit, that has to end completely. And it's not true, because there's a rich history of Black and Palestinian solidarity throughout the years. And I just want to say, be leery of certain people who say shit on the internet. Go ahead, Terrell. I didn't mean to cut you off, bro.
No, that's what I was getting into. Like Cam said it earlier, like, you know, they're basically, their fight is our fight. Mm-hmm. And like you said earlier, there's definitely a history of you know, Palestine supporting the struggles we go through here. So to say, like, oh, that has nothing to do with us, this has everything to do with us too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's more to be said on that particular thing. And originally, I think we wanted to do more of an episode on that, but it was important to just really center Palestinians. But looking at the internationalism of certain Black freedom fighters and thinking about, you know, like, I was just finishing up something, tightening up a few things in the book. And I was looking, I was trying to, I know SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was defunded by a lot of their Jewish financiers because they put out a newsletter that was very critical of Israel, you know, and their treatment of Palestine. And, you know, I actually went and found the newsletter. I had never seen the actual newsletter. I only read transcripts, and they had like 32 different facts. I mean, they were just going off, and you read it, it could feel like you're reading it today. I mean, it was very, very much the same kind of situation, just talking about all the stuff that Zionism had done and Zionists had done, you know, to the Palestinian people. And it was, and it's interesting now, you see these articles popping up. There was just one that the AP did that just dropped, I think, like yesterday or today. Might have somewhere, some here, might have been today actually, about the history that it was like Black Americans are showing solidarity with Palestinians, and this is obviously like annoying a lot of so-called Jewish supporters, you know, again, who are Zionists, who, you know, who think that, to Ryan's point, that think that this shit should be transactional. So they're like, well, we supported Black Lives Matter, so why don't you guys support us while we kill 20,000 people and counting? You know, like, that's the kind of logic that we're that we're dealing with here, you know. So yeah, there's a longer history of that. And just reading the thing with SNCC again, they pretty much couldn't function as an organization after that. I mean, they were already pissing off a lot of their funders because they had taken a more radical turn even prior. But when that newsletter came out, it didn't go well. And it was also interesting reading some of the Black leaders at that time that distanced themselves from SNCC. So like Bayard Rustin, who they just put a movie out and they leave all this kind of shit out on that man. But Bayard Rustin put out a statement denouncing, you know, SNCC for this. So did A. Philip Randolph. there was another conference where this wasn't SNCC, but it was a conference where some Black nationalists got up and started speaking, critically about Israel, and Bayard Rustin and Dr. King even walked out on that, because they didn't like what they heard, right? So there's always been a struggle. It's not that all Black people have been supportive of Palestinians. That's not true either, but there's always been a struggle there. But I think that more than ever in our lifetime, there's more people who are just like, yeah, this is bullshit. And I think that's what's so wild is like, because there's been other eruptions, within the colonial project over there, even within the last 10, 15 years that we've all been adults. And, there wasn't as much attention paid to it, but this time it seems like everybody's eyes are on it because, they really struck back this time. Right. And people are like, terrorist attack, terrorist attack, terrorist attack. Again, I'm not sitting here trying to tell people to defend all the things that they did on that day. That's not really the point. It's just keep people in a prison. I think Rana said it. She said, I was like, well, how should we understand October 7th? And she called it a prison break. And I think that's a great way of understanding it, as a prison break. And when prison breaks happen, everything that happens in prison breaks isn't totally moral, whatever, but it's prison break and you got people locked up, and in this case, particularly for no real reason, so some of the people who broke out probably aren't going to be so nice to the people who left them in prison. And if we can't understand that and we want to keep somehow denouncing that, it just, to me, we're not having a real conversation about what's happening, Last episode, probably my favorite interview of the year, the myth, Communism Made Me Do It. That was with Dr. CBS, or Dr. Sharice Burton Stelly. She had just released her book, Black Scare, Red Scare. So Communism Made Me Do It, kind of going back to a little bit of what you've been talking about with the Palestinians thing, or even going all the way back full circle to the beginning of the year, was this this idea that that Black people can't think for ourselves, and therefore ideas are imposed on us. We don't actually arrive at these positions ourselves, right? So it's like, instead of it being Black people just chose to consider communism because capitalism had them in Jim Crow, there's some foreign agent that comes in and brainwashes Black people to do it, to think like that, to choose more left ideas, etc. So her book really demonstrates the kind of full out like assault that the United States has done on the idea of being communist, or even communist adjacent, whether that's anarchist, whether that's left, or anything of that nature. And then also the deeply anti-Blackness that exists within the United States. So she it was the first single author book. I remember when she first came on the show, it was a whole different title. So give props to her for that. But I think that was a solid one. It having been on LDI and everything, it was good to see that come full circle. So that is it in regards to this long year of episodes. And I don't know if anyone has any closing thoughts, or if their drugs are kicking in so much that they can't stay out of the comments. But like, I don't, if anybody has any closing thoughts they'd like to share, otherwise we can get out of here.
It's been a year. I hope that y'all learned as much from us as we learned from each other, and we learned from y'all. Shout out to everyone who has supported us from day one, who supported us this year, who might have just popped in on the last episode, and plan to support us moving forward next year. Forever grateful for the team. I already know. Flowers, flowers, flowers.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm proud of all what we accomplished this year. I'm proud of all the work we've done. I'm proud to be a part of this podcast with you all here, and the journey has been amazing. Of course, we have our ups and downs in our personal life and everything, but we're still here. We're still kicking. we're still alive, and you know, this speaks volumes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a long year, and I'm excited for what we got coming next year. We're putting our heads together to put out more content, to we got some special things in the works. We're trying our best to keep it entertaining, of course, for you guys, but also informative. And yeah, I'm excited for it.
Yep.
Free Palestine, free Palestine, free Palestine. Toes backwards.
Toes backwards, definitely.
Yeah, but yeah, good year again. You know, every year is different. I think this was probably the most challenging year thus far for me, as far as just keeping everything on point. So I look forward to tightening up a little bit more for next year. But there's a lot of good work. There's a lot of myths to cover. Still a lot to talk about. I think we're far from done. So see us wherever we end up popping up at, and see y'all next year.
Peace.
Okay, fresh out the plane in a whole nother state. I'm trying to eat down a whole nother plate. Seem like my homies was stuck in the hood. I just told